As soon as he saw the man who was coming out, he got up from a well. A shiver ran through his body. After so many years, he recognized his father. Hakim also saw his son and ran towards him. They rushed to each other and hugged each other in a disturbing silence, crying with warm tears. The merchant, a witness to this scene, looked at them with shock. His eyes, but what could I do? I was helpless. The merchant, stunned, watched the scene. Hakim explained to him, "This man is my son." The merchant, surprised, asked, "But why have you never spoken to us about him?" So Hakim took his son aside and gave him the truth. "When I prayed, your wife prevented me from practicing my devotion. I did not want to disturb your conjugal life, nor compromise my worship of God. That's why I chose to leave." Then he added with tenderness, "My son, you are free to come and see me whenever you want." But the young man shook his head and replied with emotion, "No, father, I can't be content with that. I spent so many days looking for you. Without you, our house is empty. It looks like a cemetery. A house without the blessings of the parents is no longer a house, but a tomb." He insisted like a child in tears, refusing to leave without his father. Seeing the attachment of his son, Hakim agreed to go home with him. When the old man was getting ready to leave the cabin, his sister and his own son were crying. He didn't want to see him leave, but Hakim, moved by the love of his son, was ready to follow him. The son, who hadn't been home for a long time, finally knocked on the door of his house. His wife ran to open it. "Who is it?" she asked. "Open it, it's me," answered her husband. When she opened the door and saw his father-in-law, his eyes were filled with stupidity. His heart was tight. "This old man has come back after all this time. He's going to ruin our lives again." Without saying a word, she turned her heels and went inside without even greeting him. The evening came. At the time of the meal, her husband wanted to go get his father, so that he could eat with them. But his wife stopped him and said hypocritically, "Let him rest. I will bring him his meal in his room." His husband shook his head. "No, tonight father will dine with us. It's been so long since we shared a meal together." But happy, she sat down at the table, showing a contrary face. While Hakim and his son were enjoying this moment together, she was raging inside. But the old man found his routine. After the evening prayer, he spent long hours in worship and recited the Koran until sunrise. As long as his husband was at home, she was holding on. But as soon as he left, she rushed into the room of her father-in-law and gave him a violent kick in the pebble. "Get up and clean this house," she cried. She continued with contempt. "Why did you come back? Just to eat for free? We are already hungry. I hoped you were dead somewhere." Without a word, Hakim got up and started cleaning the house like before. He washed the dishes, rubbed the clothes, and tidied up his room. Shortly afterwards, his son came home. When he saw his father cleaning, he was surprised and asked, "Father, why are you doing this? These are tasks that my wife should do. You shouldn't tire yourself like this." To his words, his wife ran hastily. His beautiful daughter ran and exclaimed, "Father, don't do this. You're making us uncomfortable. Let me take care of everything. At your age, you should rest." But the same routine started again. Every morning, Hakim would do the household chores. Sometimes he was so busy that he missed his prayers. His beautiful daughter couldn't stand seeing him pray, and felt a deep irritation every time she noticed him in full adoration. So the days went by. One day, the sun was shining. Under this hot weather, Hakim was washing the dishes in the courtyard. Suddenly, the door opened, and a young woman entered the house. It was the same young girl Hakim had taught religion to when he lived at his old house. As soon as she saw Hakim cleaning the utensils, she approached and exclaimed, "Father, why are you doing this? Where is your beautiful daughter?" Seeing her, Hakim rejoiced deeply and replied slowly, "My daughter, your beautiful sister, has a very bad headache today. I thought it was better for me to do the dishes. And you, how are you doing?" The young girl, with a sad look, answered, I'm fine. But since you left, our house has become very empty. My brother is also looking for you constantly, and talks about you often." She considered Hakim as a father, because he had passed on wisdom and faith to her. But as they were talking, her beautiful daughter arrived and interrupted her abruptly. "Talk to him quickly and leave. What are you doing here?" The young girl, disconcerted, lowered her head. "Hakim, 100 years of aggression in the voice of his beautiful daughter tried to calm the situation. My daughter, I pray that God will forgive me my sins. If you think I'm a fool, then I'll go. Enough words, his beautiful daughter Rakana. Go. So what? This is not your home. It is the house of my husband. If he lets you stay here, I say nothing. But if you want to live under this roof, you will have to work. Hakim did not answer, and returned to sit quietly in his room. Throughout the day, he continued to do the household chores. When his son came home in the evening, he found his father exhausted. Father, why are you so tired? Did you work too much? He asked worried. His wife, trying to hide the truth, replied quickly. No, he does everything himself. I tell him to rest, but he refuses to listen. His husband turned his gaze to his father. Father, you should rest. At your age, you should not exhaust yourself like this. Spend your time in prayers and supplications. Hakim smiled softly. You are right, my son. But if I do nothing, your wife will be opposed. She is already angry with me. With his words, his son killed himself and answered nothing. That night Hakim, exhausted, lay on his bedside and recited prayers for a long time. He prayed to God, "O my Lord, soften the heart of my beautiful daughter. Make her treat me with kindness." At dawn, Hakim went back to work. Each order of his beautiful daughter was executed without protest. But deep in his heart, he had only one wish. Lord, give me more time to worship you in peace. Let me spend my last days in serenity. Don't throw away my chapel. Don't be so cruel. God doesn't like injustice. Hakim was just talking about his beautiful daughter holding him tightly and pushing him out of his room. Come on, old man, work instead of staying there to be a. If you put as much energy into cleaning as you put into your prayers, everything would be done in a few minutes. The old man, trembling on his weak legs, slowly rose up and began to sweep the dusty yard. At each sweep, a cloud of dust rose. The dust irritated his throat, and he started to cough violently. He crouched for a moment exhausted, but his beautiful daughter remained insensitive. Come on, hurry up. There is still so much to do. She imposed useless work on him, just to keep him busy. That day, Hakim had worked much more than usual. He had not even had time to eat. Worse still, he could not fulfill his prayers, because his beautiful daughter constantly prevented him from doing so. Sitting alone, he let his tears flow. But nothing or no one could stop him from remembering God. His lips kept whispering invocations even in pain. The evening came. After being painfully purified, he wanted to perform his prayer mat. But he could not find it. His chapel was no longer in his place. Without any hesitation, he took a piece of fabric, spread it on the floor, and began his prayer. He counted his invocations on his fingers. The next morning, after the prayer of the dawn, he sat down to recite the Koran. But outside he heard violent noises. His beautiful daughter threw the dishes on the floor, pouring everything into the courtyard. Worried, he put down the Koran and went out to see what was happening. The show shook him. Broken plates were rolling on the floor. Waste was scattered everywhere, including the sitah. His son, Partito with the goats, was not there to stop him from sowing chaos. She just wanted to stop him from praying. She could not stand these long hours of devotion. Yet she called herself a Muslim. But instead of respecting prayer, she was desperate. As Hakim returned to his room, she brutally grabbed him by the hair and threw him to the ground. He rose painfully, picked up the debris and returned to his recitation. Seeing that he continued despite everything, she entered the room furiously. She started hitting him with her sandals. But Hakim was still immersed in his reading. He knew he had accomplished all his tasks. Now, nothing could stop him from loving his Lord. When she saw that he was not reacting, an even more cruel idea gushed into his mind. Since it is so, I will get rid of this Quran. If he is no longer there, he will no longer be able to read it. She approached the sacred book, with the intention of throwing it away. But hardly did she put her hand on it, as her arms froze. His fingers crisscrossed, his legs wriggled. A strange grimace twisted his face. Under the stupefied eyes of the old man, his tongue stretched out and his body deformed. In a few moments, she had taken the appearance of a nanny. His terrified gaze desperately sought an explanation. Hakim, shocked, retreated and murmuring, "May God protect us." It was then that he raised his eyes and saw his son standing at the entrance. His son, he had seen everything. His son had seen everything with his own eyes. His wife, now transformed into a dwarf, he approached him by pushing strange cries. When he saw her in this state, he immediately held his hands to his ears, shaken by this divine punishment. Her body had become that of a dwarf, but her face remained human. It was she, the same woman who prevented Hakim from praying, who humiliated him day after day. Horrified, her husband immediately chased her out of the house. She became a spectacle of terror for the whole village. The inhabitants, bewildered by his spell, decided to capture her and take her to the forest. There, the wild beasts attacked her and tore her to pieces. History spread like a train of powder throughout the region. When the news reached the ears of the merchant and his sister, they were taken by surprise. They raised their hands to the sky, exclaiming, "O Lord, what a terrible lesson!" They rushed to Hakim stunned. "Baba, what happened?" The old man, with a calm wisdom, replied, "My son, when a true believer sees another Muslim praying, he finds inspiration in him to worship God. But my beautiful daughter was different." He sighed and added, "Instead of approaching God, she turned to every prayer. Today, she has become an example for all, a visible warning." Then, Hakim smiled gently and put a benevolent hand on the young man's head. But God knew that this woman was not worthy. He had reserved a virtuous wife for him. In his words, Hakim made his son marry the merchant's sister. Shortly after, the young wife founded a small religious school in their house. The children of the village came to learn faith and memorized the Koran. Now Hakim lived in serenity and gratitude. His new beautiful daughter respected him and took care of him with devotion. Thus, their family finally found peace and prosperity.